All right, so we are in the Justice for the Foreigner series. So Lizzie, you saw on our website, we've done a series on justice for the unborn. We did 3 episodes on that. We did 3 episodes on justice for victims of sex trafficking. And then we started justice for the foreigner. And we've done 2 episodes. We interviewed Matt Sorens, who is the director of church mobilization and advocacy for World Relief. And now we are interviewing you. Lizzie, you are somebody that I've gotten to know a little bit. You're from Main Street Alliance Church, which is one of our partner churches. You took a preaching class that I taught, and you were one of the more gifted ones. And,
thank you.
But you also bailed on the class at some point. And so
I did. I'm sorry. It wasn't a requirement for me, so I was taking it for fun.
I don't get any credit for this. I'm out. But I remember thinking, I want to hear Lizzie's story. And now we had the opportunity, we have a need to interview somebody who did immigrate to the United States. And you were at the top of the list to try to grab. So we're going to talk to you about where you came from, why you came to the U.S., your experience here, what the church has done well, how the church has screwed up. Your pastor, Bob Nash, said, make sure she tells about all the ways that we've been insensitive to her. So we'll definitely ask you about that. And then we'll just get into wherever else it goes. So let's start off by just talking about where you are originally from. Where were you born and raised?
Good. So my name is Lizzie Noumi. And I was born and raised in Cameroon and in the city called Douala, which is the economical capital of the country. So it's like the New York City of Cameroon. So if you go to Cameroon, you have to go to Douala first. Okay. That's where all the fun happens. And so I was born and raised there. And at 18, do I give my whole history, what I did after that?
Yeah, keep going. I'll cut you off, or Tom will cut you off if need be.
Sounds good. Yeah. So I'm the youngest in the family of 5 children. So my parents, they weren't poor. So we always had food at our table, but we weren't necessarily rich either. So we're part of that middle class in the country. However, my parents, they saved every single penny that they had in order to give us a better education. And for them at that time, it meant to send their children overseas. So each one of us, after high school, once we graduated, we each left the country to go in Europe and to pursue our studies. And the deal was my parents would pay for a year, and then after that, we were on our own. So it's a little different than, what you see often here. So at the moment we would leave the house, we knew that, okay, you only have 10 months worth of, money to pay for your school and for your living. But you got to figure out the rest of your life, basically. And so that was the way of planting a seed. And the idea was, I'm planting a seed in the first one, and he's going to help planting the seed in the second, and so forth. And I was the youngest, and it was definitely beneficial for me to have other brothers who went before me and who were able to give me a little bit of advice of what to do, what not to do. And so at 18, I left Cameroon, and I went to Italy. I went there to study engineering, and I had a bachelor degree in industrial engineering. And after that, I decided to pursue a master's degree in finance. And all that, I was able to do all those studies because I had scholarships. So I was also grateful to be able to have good grades and to maintain scholarships that will cover everything for me. Wow. So that was a blessing. And
Wow. And how long were you in Italy for?
I lived there for 4 years. And after that, I went for a year in UK, London. And after London, I went for 2 years. I lived in Paris, France. And that's where I graduated in 2013 with my master's degree in hand, another master's degree, bachelor degree in my backpack. And I was ready to take on the whole world. But God had different plans for me. I went to a very, very good school in in Paris. It's actually one of the best business schools in Europe. And I was able to have a lot of interviews, and they went well. One of the things that you learn when you go to business school is they kind of teach you how to present yourself, how to talk about your strength, and even how, to go around talking about your weaknesses and making them look like strengths actually, and be like, oh, I want this person on my team. And but the funny thing that wasn't quite funny at the time is, despite the fact that I had many interviews, I wouldn't get a job offer. And I was a believer already, and I really knew that I could not fully separate my work life, my school life, with my Christian life. I knew I was a believer, and that was what would define the rest of my life. And so, as I was entering into this process of looking for a job, I also, did the right thing that we're supposed to do as Christian. I prayed about it, and I asked God, where do you want me to go? What do you want me to do with this? Here I am in France, and I'm finishing. You have a residency. My residency was coming to an end because I was still Cameroonian citizen, so I couldn't stay there forever. I needed to find a job so that my document would be translated from a student visa into a work permit, residency, basically. So praying about all this, I just had this sense that God was saying, I don't think you're supposed to stay here. I think you're kind of done in France. I think you have to leave. And I didn't like that response, And I was like, no, maybe it's just, me having those thoughts. It just doesn't make sense for me to leave France and to go where? Like, it just doesn't make sense. So the one thing that I didn't say is, at that point, I was in Europe for 7 years, 4 years in Italy, a year in UK, and 2 years in France. And when I was studying in Italy, I actually applied for the green card lottery. And it's called a lottery because it's actually a lottery. The green card is a program that, the green card lottery is a program that the US government has put in place to kind of allow people from different countries to be able to apply for a permit, green card residency. So when you have a green card, you can legally live in this country, you can legally work. And so basically you have all the documents that you need to live here. And the idea was, America is the land of opportunity. So like, why not? The whole world will want to move and live in this country. So
even when you're, just to be clear, you get to Italy to study,
yeah,
but you applied for the green card lottery in the US at the same time.
So that was like 2 years in. So this is how it happened. I was actually doing my homework. So I was studying on my computer. I was doing my homework. And sometimes when you study, you see those ads that pop up, and you're like, you can disregard them, or you can actually, let me take a look. And so I got a little distracted. I was like, the green card lottery. I heard about this thing. And I knew friends who actually applied to it. And I was like, let me see if this is really a thing or if it's a scam. So I started the application like being like, it's nothing serious. Let me just take a break from my studies and fill out this form and see where it's going to take me. And so it was random. I had no intention of moving in America. I was just like, taking a break and filling out the form. And that's kind of how this whole thing started. My journey started in 2008. I filled out the form, and 2010, I got an interview to the American Embassy, and they gave me the visa to come to America.
So by that point, 2010, when you get the call about the green card, you were already feeling like God didn't want you to stay in France.
No, at that point, I was still studying.
Okay.
And I said, well, listen, it does not make sense for me to drop everything, the full ride scholarship that I just got for a very good school. And so I said, okay, I'm just going to come and visit. I come for like a couple of weeks, and I have friends here. I visited them.
Okay.
I saw what America was about. Anyway, I thought that I saw what America was about, and I was like, I don't like this country. It was good to visit for 2 weeks, but let me go back and let me finish my studies. So that's kind of how this process, I was like, I have the green card, but I don't really plan on using it. And so from 2010, I just like kept it in the back pocket, but I continued to study, and I finished my master's degree 3 years later, 2013. And so that's how I am now in Paris 3 years later, praying and asking God, what's the next chapter? Hoping that God will answer, saying, I'm going to get you a job, and you just do great and you have an awesome career, and God is like, you got to move.
And did you feel like he was calling you to the U.S. in particular?
I felt like he was calling me to the US because one of the specific things that I was praying about is, can I just get rid of this green card? I don't want it. I don't want to live in the US. I'm not interested into that. I came here in Europe to study. I'm done with that. Now I just need a job. So, I was asking God to bless my prayer, which is give me a job here in Paris. So, and God had a different answer.
What was it about your first trip to America that actually turned you against the country initially?
What turned you against us?
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't. I wasn't against. Let's say I wasn't
what was
attracted to
off-putting
it.
to you? Yeah.
I wasn't really attracted. It wasn't. Sometimes people would be like, "Yeah, love at the first sight." It wasn't like that. So the one thing that it was is one of my friends. They explained to me how life is here, and they were talking about the system of having credit and building credit. And so when you come from living in Europe for so many years, and the mindset there is whatever you get, whatever you have is whatever you owe it. Like you pay for it, you pay the full price for it. But what they explained to me is like, here is really not like that. Like you can actually drive a brand new car and you haven't even paid a penny on it. And you can have a huge house and you haven't paid anything on it, because it's like this whole system of like credit. And so that already like turned me a little off, because, not only I come from Europe, but I also come from Africa, an African country where it's like, you're not gonna try to dream for things that you cannot afford. So that's kind of how I was raised. And they were telling me it is not possible to get anything here without by paying the full price. You needed to have credit in order to survive. So that was like one thing that just like, I was like, okay.
So it was the American embrace of debt and living beyond our means.
Exactly.
American traditions.
Basically. I was a little turned off by that. And the other thing was the church. The church and seeing and hearing a lot of people preaching prosperity gospel. It's like, oh yeah, if you claim it enough, or if you pray this amount of time, you're gonna get it. Of course, now I know it's not all churches are like that, but that was very, very loud in my ears when I came here the first time. And it was a little scary too, because I didn't know that much of the gospel. I mean, I knew a little bit. At that point, I was already a believer for like 9 years, and I still don't think I know that much. But I knew there was something that was really off in that gospel, and I didn't want to be part of it. And so I couldn't really see why God would call me in this country with those, two big things that for me were a little off.
Interesting.
Gotcha. Now, if we could just get a little background, Chris, if you don't mind. You said you and all 4 of your siblings left the country after graduating high school to educate yourselves elsewhere. Were the opportunities just not there in Cameroon for advancing yourselves?
So we do have universities in Cameroon, and but the realities of the country, it make it look like even though you may have a degree and you could have a degree, you don't necessarily have enough opportunities to find a job by yourself. And a lot of things happen by, recommendation. You need to know someone in order to get into some places. And so there's like a lot of politics that can go into it. And my parents just didn't want to have to go through all that. And, so they decided to sacrifice their lives, basically. We never had vacations. For us, vacation meant, okay, I am going to go to visit my uncle and stay with him and my cousins for like a couple of weeks, and they're going to come over. And that was it. So the aspect of, oh, let's take a trip and go somewhere else, it really never really existed. Because it's just not in our culture. In our culture, it was really like work hard, save every single dime that you have, and give the minimum that you can to your kid, and you pray that they will make the wise decisions in order to be able to, have a good future.
And did your parents ever consider or even try to move both themselves and all of your siblings to a different country where maybe all that was available? Did they ever try that, or they not consider leaving Cameroon?
it is not as easy as it sounds. Even when you want to move to go to another country to study as a student, you may be denied the visa. And I know this is a concept also that was very difficult for me to explain to Americans when I came here. And I say, yeah, I need to ask a visa. I need to have a visa for me to go to France. And that's something that they couldn't understand. They were like, why do you need a visa? I was like, because I'm from Cameroon. I am not American. So there is this concept where, you know, a lot of, you can't just move to another country without reason. So you have people who move because either they're refugees and because they're in danger in their own country. So that's very a special case. And even for that, it would take some time for you to be able to be granted to leave your country or to have a visa to get into another one. But just to move for no reason or because you want to look for a better opportunity is really, really rare. And that's not something that, unless you work for a company that says, hey, I really like you and I have offices in another country and I'm going to move your family. But that wasn't the case for my dad or my mom. So it just doesn't happen like that. Different countries, different realities,
Yeah.
right?
So can I ask then why you decided to come back to the U.S.? Like you felt like God leading you to the U.S., but what, you know, what was it? Like what, to do something, to be something, to...
Yeah, that's the weird thing. It's not like he laid out a clear plan for me and said, Lizzie, this is what I'm going to do for the next 3 to 5 years of your life. I really didn't know exactly what it was for. So after spending time and praying about it, I knew God was calling me here, but I still didn't like that idea. So I decided to get a job with my own means, basically, in Paris. And so I pursued that path and continued to have interviews and no job offer until the last one, where finally I went into like 5-6 steps and I was just waiting for the final job offer and it didn't come. And at that point I could clearly hear the voice of God saying, when are you going to stop fighting with me? I want you to leave. And so then that's where I was like, okay, I've been fighting for enough time and I don't want to do this anymore because it's painful. And at the end of the day, it's being disobedient to the Lord. And I had all these questions. I didn't have the answer. So I did the one thing that I knew to do. I booked a ticket from Paris to New York City. And I say, okay, you know what, God, if you're sending me to America, here's my ticket. I'm leaving in 6 weeks. You better open the door because I don't know anyone in New York City. I have friends in Maryland, but I knew that that wasn't where God was calling me. So I said, let's pick New York City because that's where finance, you know, is the capital. And so that's what I studied. And I figured even if I had to live on the streets, at least I could get a job in New York City. So that's kind of how it, and then how did I actually ended up here? I remember the pastor that I knew in Paris, and he was the only American that I was actually close to. I mean, maybe the only American that I knew at that point. And I say, hey, he's a pastor. He lives in France. He's American. He must know someone who lives in New York City. So 2 weeks before my flight, I went to talk to him and I say, listen, I know this might sound crazy, but I am living to the United States. I really don't know where I'm going to stay, but I have this ticket leaving December 16 and I'm going from Paris to New York City. Do you know anyone there that can host me for a few days? And he knew someone. He said, listen, like, here is the email, reach out to them and let me know what they say. And so I reached out to the person. I told them my whole entire story. Born and raised in Cameroon, met Jesus at 16, moved to Italy, UK, France, and here I am. I'm coming to America, and I don't know what the next chapter will look like, but would you want me to stay at your house for a couple of weeks? And I think their response really like blew me away more than anything else. And so their response is saying like, wow, what a great step of faith. And we really believe that this is God calling you and sending you here because as a church, we've been praying for the nation of France. And we believe that if we are able to reach Paris and France for Jesus, therefore we can reach the whole world. So we don't think this is just, you know, we don't think this is, we think this is an answer to our prayers. And we think that this is God sending you here. And that person was Valerie Nash, Pastor Bob's wife. And this is how I ended up here.
Wow. So wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's how I got here.
So you ended up staying with them and
2 weeks, ended up being 4 months in the basement. And now it's been 8 years that I'm here.
wow. So you never actually lived in New York, really?
I never lived in New York State. I always lived in New Jersey.
In the suburbs of New Jersey.
In the suburbs of New Jersey. Important to specify because when I say New Jersey, people think it's Jersey City. I'm like, nope.
Yeah. From Paris, France, the center of Europe, to
Yes.
Western New Jersey.
And to really be more specific, to Jackson, New Jersey, in the basement of a pastor who has 9 children. And my career was to change babies' diapers. Yes. With master degrees, bachelor degrees, and all those things. God had a funny way to really humble me. It was really humbling, but the reason why, let me just back it up a little bit. I came here and I had all these different degrees, but the church family, Building on the Rock at that time, and kind of like the people and the stories. So I came and I lived with a pastor of a church full of people who really struggled through so many hardships in life, and some of them never really graduated high school. Some of them went into drugs, some of them went into alcohol, and had all this past and all these different addictions. And so the ministry that was really thriving at the time was a ministry to help people recover from those addictions. So you have me with like a good, like a resume, and I can tell you like, oh, this is everything that I've studied. But then I am part of a community surrounded by people who may not have that head knowledge anyway that I had. But the one thing that they had is they had a passion for Christ. So it's not like they saw me. Actually, I don't even think they ever asked me about my resume because they didn't care about it, which was very weird because where I come from, it's like one of the first questions they ask you, they're like, okay, what degree do you have? Because they define you by that. And that's like the European French culture is really proper. It's really about where you studied. It's about the name of the school that you have on your resume and where you had internships and all those things. And depending on how you answer those questions, then you will be treated a certain way. So when I came here, no one really cared. Honestly, no one even asked me. So like, it's not like they were like, okay, so what are you here for? Like, what do you want to do? They're like, this is what we do. And if you want to help out, this is how you can help out. There are kids that need to be washed, and there are diapers that need to be changed. And so, yeah, and I was just helping out. But then, once you do it, and now you're like, okay, when am I going to get out of here? Because I'm not here for that. And God is like, well, I'm not making a way for you to go out. I want you actually to stay. And the most difficult part for me wasn't to come in America. It was to stay in America where God had me, because God was saying, Lizzie, are you willing to, surrender, your thought process about where you are supposed to be because of your resume? It's really not about your resume. I'm not after that. I'm after your heart. And that was the most difficult part for me in my story. It wasn't to come to America. That was easy. Hop on the plane and come here and woohoo, the American dream. It was to stay, because for me to stay meant to say, are you willing to get rid of, your resume for a second and change diapers? Because maybe by changing diapers, God is going to do something new in your heart. And so, yeah.
Wow.
That's a pretty good illustration of Paul's theory of learning to be content in all situations.
Yeah. And that was another wrestling match that I had to go through. It took me about like 4 or 5 weeks to get to that point. And when I came, I was miserable as someone could be, because I would compare myself to others. I would look at my classmates and see those who had great jobs at great companies in Europe. And, you always have the enemy whispering in your ears and be like, that could have been you. You missed out and all those things. But at the same time, I knew that I was in the right place. But, like sometimes you're the right place, but your heart is not there yet. And that's kind of where God was like trying to, make me realize, it's like your heart is not here because your heart is still looking at those things that I don't care about. The one thing that I always felt like there was something missing. though I was part of the church, I felt like there was something, a piece of the church that I'm still not getting fully. There was a piece of the church that I'm not able to grasp, but I couldn't put my finger on it. And before coming to America, I was reading through the book of Acts, and I was reading about the early church. And I remember saying like, wow, God, I wonder if on earth there is such a church that actually gives up everything for you and lives for you and only for the gospel, and is willing to, like coming together and putting everything that they have together and meet every single need. Like that's a picture that always like struck me. And on my ride from JFK, because Pastor Bob and Val picked me up actually on my ride from JFK to their house when they picked me up, and they asked me about my journey, and I told them about my experience of reading the book of Acts, and they're like, oh yeah, I wonder if such a church, exists here on earth. Because I remember I prayed, like, say, God, if it exists, can you please allow me to see it? And 5 weeks in, I'm miserable. I hate everyone. I'm sick and tired of hearing stories of drug addicts that have been delivered, and people were like jumping up and down for Jesus and all those things. I'm like, I am sick and tired of you. And I point fingers at everyone and I tell them all the things that they do wrong. And God was like, do you remember that prayer that you prayed? Saying like, if there's an Acts 2 type of church, you would like to see it. And I was like, yeah, I remember. It's like, you have it right in front of you. But now the thing is, would you want to be part of it? Because one big piece of me, I knew that to be part of this Acts 2, it meant that I will have to take off my masks. I will have to be vulnerable, and I will have to, just come clean. And I was so used to playing church that I didn't even know what it looked like to come clean. And that's the church that I fell in love with the big C, the church where you don't have that weight and burden of, just putting on a mask and putting on a show and pretending that everything is okay, knowing that it's really not. But just coming just the way you are.
Wow.
That's great that he put you in that situation, diapers and all.
Exactly. Sometimes it takes the diapers,
Do you feel like you were the victim of injustice, in the 8 years you've been here because of and injustice might be too strong of a word for some things, but where you were discriminated against or ostracized or excluded or just at a disadvantage because you were a foreigner?
By the church or in general?
Or by the culture in general, either one.
At a personal level, I wouldn't say that, I've been a victim of injustice as far as the culture is concerned. And I try to pretty much be low-key profile wherever I go, whatever I do. But I do see the looks. I do hear the comments. I do hear the oh, you have all these degrees. And, when people start people see you and they think a certain thing about you. And then when they hear a little bit more about what you do and a little bit more about where you come from, they're taken back because they would have never expected those things to happen.
Meaning they wouldn't expect someone from Africa to be so educated? Is that what okay.
Yeah, because the idea that people have from Africa, I mean, let's be honest, what do you see on the TV? You will see on the TV that their kids that are poor, that are malnourished, and they need help. And that's how you see it. It's like, oh, let me help the little kid with compassion in I don't know, Rwanda, Kenya, and all those different countries. And that's usually what they see when they think about African countries. And so sometimes you have people because they don't know. And that's also what I'm like, okay, you don't know. You just know what you know, and you know what the TV shows you. And I even take myself as an example. When I thought of America, even before coming here, I thought that, you had gangs in every single street, and all those things happening. But when you live in this country, you realize, well, it's not really like that. It's not everywhere like that. There may be some areas that they'll be like, okay, don't spend time there after a certain time of the day. But it's not like every single street in America, it's full of gangster. Everyone has a gun. like another cliche, you know, everyone hates Black people. It's again, like this is another cliche that when you're outside of this country, you believe about America.
So
And
that was one idea that you had, is that everybody hates Black people, white people. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I knew that's what the TV would show you. I didn't believe it in my heart. I didn't like, but I knew it was like this is what America shows. But let me see for myself. So like, you know, sometimes it's like this is what I've heard. Like, let me see for myself. So I know, like, for that it was like the gun thing. I really thought that every single American had a gun, but I realized.
Did you ask Pastor Bob and Bell where their guns were? Did you say we were going to go shoot them?
Listen, he was a Marine, so for me, it was like that's the first introduction that he he said to me. So of course he has a gun. He was a Marines. I know. So yeah, but in the church, definitely. In the church, definitely. I mean, as you can hear, I do have an accent, so it's not like obvious for everyone that that I can be. No one can really think I'm an African American born and raised here. So definitely stand out.
Before you zoom into the church, you had mentioned to me that not being an African American, being an African, and the line that you feel is drawn between African Americans who were born in America and you. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think the one thing that we don't necessarily talk too much about is and let me make sure that I say this right, is the discrimination that exists within minorities, like minority communities, basically. There is a discrimination within different communities, you know, like Black, Latinos, Asian, and all those things. But the one that we don't necessarily talk about either is even within the Black community. And that's something that I experienced personally. Like, though I'm Black, I would be a Black African American who clearly, no, and of course, I'm not saying every single one. I'm just talking in general. Like, this is something tension that I know it's existing right now between like the African Americans who are Black and the Africans who aren't, who are Black, but they're not American. So like people like me, for example, or even the Africans living still in Africa and what they think about African Americans here. So there is like this like stigma that we all have, like that the African community has and that the African American community has. And so there is this kind of like weird tension existing because we may look the same, but we're not the same. And sometimes they want to make it clear that we are not the same. And it's true. And I try to understand both communities. The reality is African Americans here in this country, they went through a lot. And so to say that they're Africans who live in Africa, who live in their countries, they know the culture, they know where they come from, they you know, like they know where they belong ultimately. Like it's not the same thing. When you have African Americans here who feel like they were stripped away from their heritage and they came here in this country and they've never been welcomed. I mean, that's kind of how I feel. I mean, again, I'm just exaggerating a little bit. And so like you will see often in the Black African American community, you will see in that community that some of them will actually reject everything that comes from Africa because they're like, I was born here. This is my country. I am American. They want to be recognized as American citizen. They don't want to be discriminated because of their skin color. They want to be accepted because of the country they belong to. But when you say African American, you're making an association with a place that they don't even know they have no knowledge of. They've never been there. And Africa is not a nation. And that's why I also say to a lot of people, it's not a country, it's a continent. There are many countries in that one continent. It is not a nation. So when you say you're African, it's like I'm saying to someone you're Asian. Or it doesn't mean anything. You know, like say that you're Chinese, say that you're from South Korea. Like, but to say that you're Asian, it's just like, it's not a country. So like you were telling an African American that they're African, but first of all, it's not a nation. So like, what does that mean that I'm African, right? And so like, and they've never been there. So they can't really relate to that place. And there is this kind of love-hate relationship with that place because of the history of that place. They were there and they were taken away from there. Oh, their ancestors were there and they were taken away from there and they were brought here. And now they belong to this country. But the white Americans are saying, well, you're really from there, therefore I'm going to call you African American. So there's like this kind of like wrestling match that they have in the community. And I'm just going back in the history aspect. I'm not even going into like the social aspect and, like the laws and all those things that have happened in this country to really discriminate white and Black Americans. But I'm really just talking about the African Americans. And now you have African like me, right? So this is a picture, and I'm not saying one group is right or wrong. I'm just trying to understand where they're coming from. And I'm trying to understand how we may feel. That you're born in the place rejects you and says that, oh no, you really belong to the other place, but you've never been there. It's just kind of weird, this weird dynamic. But now you have Africans like me. Okay, so I'm from Cameroon, and in Cameroon, because I'm just going to use Cameroon, but it's the case in many African countries, we feel, and when I say we, it's the majority of the population, we feel like white people came into our country and took a lot of resources that we had for their own benefit. And some of those white people are Americans. And so what they did with the everything that we had in the countries, whether it's like gold or cotton or cocoa, whatever you had in your country, whatever natural resource that you had that they benefit from, they developed the country, right? They developed European countries, they developed America, and all those things. So when we think about life in those countries, we think that life is great. America is the land of opportunities. This is like, you live in America, therefore you're living the dream. So that's the idea that the African person has. And that's the reason why you will see people losing their lives, trying to get out of the country by so many different means, like through boats, through the sea, because they want to go to Europe. They're going to try these crazy routes, and they're like, I'm willing to sell everything that I have because I've heard that, oh, you might have a car that can take me to Morocco. And then from there, I will take a small boat to go to Spain. And once I'm in Spain, then I can go to all the different countries in Europe. And then maybe I can make my way to America. So like, this is a perception that African people have of Europe, America. So if I live in Africa, whatever country it is, and this is my perception of how life is in Europe and how life is in America, therefore, I believe that every single person living in those countries has all the opportunities that they can have, and they just need to take it. So I would say, okay, you Black people who live in America, you need to stop complaining and you need to start working. So like, this is the perception that Africans have of Black African Americans. They would say, they will have this perception saying like, hey, you already live there. Like, why are you complaining? Like, I am trying to get there. I cannot get there in the right means. I cannot get a visa. I don't have enough money to pay a flight. They wouldn't even give me the visa. So they would never allow me to leave my country through a plane. So therefore, I'm willing to lose my life and go through these crazy routes, take boats and whatever. And the people would die. Like, there are thousands of people who die every single day in those coasts and seas in Africa because they're trying to go to Europe, right? So if they're willing to lose their life thinking that life is so much better in Europe, what do you think they think of those who are living in those countries? That if you guys don't succeed, it's just because you're lazy. So then that's the love-hate relationship that it is, that I feel like most of the tension that you have between like African people from Africa because of what they think of how life is in America. And then you have African Americans, Black Americans in here. So it's just kind of a weird combination.
Interesting.
And
yeah.
I don't know if it makes sense, but it's a weird dynamic.
No, it does. And how has that impacted you personally? Like, how has that tension impacted you?
So I've definitely seen in the church, and now I'm going to come in the church because that's mostly where I have most of the relationships that I have, like the close one. And I've seen how it has been difficult to build relationship with African Black Americans. Sorry, what did I say? No, difficult to build relationship with Black African Americans.
Okay.
Because
you feel like harder than white folks?
I feel like harder than white folks, honestly, because, but again, I am just using my example, so I don't want to generalize and say this is always the case, because I feel like sometimes people will be like, okay, you may look like me, but you're not one of us. Like there is like a usness that if you're kind of close to Black African American, there is an usness. Like there is a heritage, there is a culture, there is like their own thing that they do and their own way of like doing things, of speaking and things like that, and just like, even referring to things, that it can be so clear from the beginning that you're not one of us, right? So yeah, I might say hi to distance, but I'm probably not going to invite you into my close circle, because that's only reserved to family, and family means those who were born and raised here, we will understand those roots. We will, like it's. But being a foreigner in the country, it's really not easy, because you already have to go through your own insecurities. English is not my first language. I have an accent. I make mistakes, and you have all these different dynamics that are already going on as you're trying to communicate with someone. But when you feel like, okay, you're rejected, then why would I try harder? You understand what I'm saying? I'm like, I already have to fight through all those different things. And if I'm rejected, or if I feel like I'm rejected, I'm not going to try harder. So that's kind of like, I feel that he has been as a foreigner in a country, not only in America, but even when I was in the other countries. And funny enough, though I lived in France, though French is my first language, even in France, I felt it.
Lizzie, you've lived in multiple majority white countries that speak a different language than you. So you've had experience of being a foreigner of, generally of different race from the majority of the population, as well as speaking a different language. So in those different situations, have you found it to be more or less hospitable in America compared to other places that you've been?
This is what I would say, and I'm not sure if this is right, but this is what I would say I feel personally. I feel like the Americans are more welcoming to Black Africans. That's how I feel, if I have to compare the American experience with the experience in Italy and all that. And I have a sense that I feel like the Americans, again, and this is my feeling, I'm probably maybe 100% wrong, but I feel like the American will respect more the Black African coming from Africa by the right means, and the one that is trying to really have a good life. And I feel like they give more respect to that, because they're already used to seeing Black people. So it's not like, oh, I am not.
More respect than.
Yeah.
Than what?
Than a Black African American, because there is a stigma that there is, that the normal white American has towards the Black African American. There is already a stigma. So when you see a Black African, knowing that it's a person coming from Africa, you won't necessarily associate that stigma right away with that person. So you will probably be more inclined to hear that person coming from, the outside. So that's how I feel personally. And I'm talking, in this case, it's not the church related. I'm talking more work related. So I worked, so I've been in America for 8 years, and I almost worked for 8 years. I work in banking industry, and right now I work in the energy industry. And I can see how bosses that I've had respected me more because of my hard work and because of where I came from. And knowing that, oh, maybe because of the idea of, what Africa is like, and seeing my, my resume, they're like, oh my gosh, like, definitely, yeah, I'm going to vouch for Lizzie. And yeah, that's what but I'm talking about the world perspective, but that's based on my own experience. So I can't take that and say that's always the case. But I do know that for, in the world anyway, workplaces, I feel like I've gained, like, people respected me more just by hearing my story and by knowing what I went through as far as schooling and things like that. They would give me more credit compared to a Black African American.
Interesting.
Yeah, some people were not liked, not because they didn't do a good job, but just because they were Black African Americans.
To kind of start to land the plane here, what did the church do well, and where did the church do poorly in welcoming you and supporting you and showing hospitality to you as a foreigner?
So I would say to some extent, the church did a good job at welcoming me and at welcoming the foreigners. I'm not the only foreigner in my church. But I would say, yeah, it's more like come and this is the way we do church, and come and this is who we are, and come and this is what a culture is about. And it's not always been, hey, let me learn about you. Let me learn about your culture. Let me learn about, the way you do church, or, the way you sing worship songs and the way you dance dances. Like one time, it was probably like my first couple of years that I was here. So I showed a video of a tribal dance that my tribe does, right? And it's like, again, it's like, I was born into this. I grew up into this. And I'm like, I am trying and I'm willing to share this intimate experience with you, my friend, right? My white friend. And the first response was like, ew. I was like, what? Like, think about the offense, think about like, hey, this is me, right? This is me. And so then what do you do when you see that? It's like, oh, I'm never going to show that to anyone again if this is going to be their response, right? And therefore, I am not going to show a part of me to anyone. And so it's kind of like wearing a mask, and I'm going to be the Lizzie that you want me to be so that I can fit into your church, but you don't really want to know the real Lizzie. Am I making sense? And this is one of the things where I also try to be sensitive and say, okay, instead of saying you should know better, why wouldn't you do that? And if there is something that I've learned about American culture, Americans are very loud. And usually you hear more about the ones who are the loudest, right? So if you're part of a community or a congregation where you have 90% people of a certain background, therefore you're gonna try to make your program or your church to lean more towards the 90% of people in your congregation. And so it's really about that. And so I wouldn't necessarily say that it's because you don't care about the 10%. I would say it's just the 90% is what is the loudest. And so therefore you go with that. There's definitely room to grow to allow everyone to have a seat at the table. And yeah, we can always do better.
In what ways, you gave some somewhat specifics or targeted ways at which it could be improved, but in what ways, as specific as you can be, have they been welcoming, or have people reached out to you, or have they made you feel comfortable, just so we can get an idea of what has helped,
yeah,
your situation. What have they done right, would you say?
Well, I'm telling you, when you are 6,000 miles away and you're about to hop on a plane without knowing if you're going to have food to eat or a bed to sleep in, and you hear that someone is willing to take you in, and a person who has never met you in their life, then that's definitely a right way to do it, right? So I will always go back to that and just be like, wow, like these are the people who say yes without even knowing me. I could have been a crazy person. I could have been, who knows, whatever. But they took a risk in saying yes to me. And they definitely even saw something, even when I was at my worst, those first 5 weeks of staying here. They saw something and they didn't give up. And that's what I need to remind myself, that as they didn't give up on me, then I shouldn't give up on them, right? It was definitely helpful to feel welcome and to feel part of a family. And that has been my experience since day one. I don't think I felt different because I was Black. I never really felt like a Black person. Do you want to know when I felt like a Black person? After my 5 weeks almost of being here, and I was so miserable, someone from our church went to our senior pastor and said, oh, Lizzie is so miserable. I think you probably should ask her to go and visit the other church. And he was like, what do you mean the other church? And the person was like, like the black church down down the street. And there was a Baptist black church down the street of where our church was at the time. And they thought that if I was going to a church where people would look a little bit more like me, therefore I would be happier. So when Pastor Bob came and told me that, he was like, you're so miserable that people want you to go somewhere else. And I was like, go where? It's like, he think that you'll be happier if you go to the other church. I was like, what church? He's like, black church.
Wait,
I was like, what?
he told you right away about that conversation?
Told me. He didn't tell me who it was. He's like, yeah, people come to me every single day. They say like, I need to let you go. Like, I'm the one holding you here. I'm like, really? He's like, yeah, they want you to go to the black church. I was so offended, but not because my offense wasn't, I think I was like, are you serious? Like, I'm not black. And then as I was saying that, I was like, wait, I am black. But, I just didn't see myself that way because I saw myself as Lizzie. And I was like, who cares? Like, I didn't see that, I'm black, then why I was part of the church. And
were they saying this out of concern for you? Like, poor
yes.
girl, she's stuck in this white church. Let's release.
I was the only black person in the church.
Like, let her free, let her go.
Let her
go, kind of thing. Okay, so it's not that they wanted you out because you were black. They were like, this poor girl's stuck with all us white people. We need to let her go.
We need to let her go. Maybe if she goes to the black church, she will feel, better. She will be happier. That's what it felt. And then my first answer to Pastor was like, I'm not black. And then I was like, take that back. I am black, but it doesn't matter.
Wow.
I was like, I don't care. It's not about the skin color. He was like, then why are you so miserable? And I was like, I don't know.
So what they did wrong there was to associate your misery with the fact, with
exactly
assumption that it must be because she's black. And
exactly. And they never asked me.
Yeah.
Sometimes it just takes to engage the other person in the conversation and actually ask the question directly. Say, hey, what's going on? I see this, what's going on, instead of making assumptions and then based on the assumption giving advice. And I think that's where the church can really be harmful in this process, to say, I think it's because of this, therefore I'm going to ask the person to do this. You should ask her to do that. I'm like, wait, what? Can you actually have a conversation? So yeah, that we always go back to that incident and we talk about it and we laugh about it, but I'm sure other people will be like, see, told you, like, they're all racist. And okay, now we're not going to go to the other extreme. And I really think this is like one of the things where as believers we have to remember that like what I say, families is tough, it's hard. Like, there are good times, but there are times that are also difficult, but we fight through it. It's not because we have a disagreement, it's not because we don't see eye to eye that it means that we can't live this life together. We do have the Holy Spirit, and I think sometimes we forget that. And I get that in the moment things can get heated. I get that in the moment, our emotions or feelings or things from the past can rise up to the surface, but let's not forget the Holy Spirit. When this whole thing happened with George Floyd, I had a very heated argument with Pastor Bob. And I know deeply that he's probably one of the few people that I trust the most, and I will entrust my whole entire life to him. He's like more than a father to me. And but when that happened and we had a conversation about it, it just all went south very quickly. I mean, you know how he is, and you probably don't know how I am. And we were like going at it like really bad. And I was like, I can't believe this is what you see when you look at this, and I think this, like, that's a perfect example that I can take to say, like, how when we see those events happening, we all have our filters and our biases, and we also have our baggage that we carry, right? And usually I will respond based on those things, and the other person will do the same. But then when we are able to kind of calm down and we're able to pray through this and say, can we reason together? Can we come to the cross? Can we invite the Holy Spirit into this and let's try to pray through it and really ask God, what do you see here that I'm missing? And if each one of us, if we all do this work, maybe we will go somewhere, you know. So yeah, there've been mistakes, and I can give a list of it, but I don't think that's the point. I think the point is to say fight through it, you know, like the same way they have to learn, the same way I had to learn. Like there is no right, like there's no side into this thing. And I think what saddens me the most is like people say, which side are you? Are you red or are you blue? Because like I want you to choose, and God is like, I am neither. I'm at the center. I'm at the cross, and this is where I want you to meet me. Yeah, I would say, if I can say something and to the leaders, I think I told you that on the phone, it has to start at the top. I think sometimes we expect this whole huge revival to happen in the church and every single one would experience it. And I believe that and I want that. But if we don't have leaders, we're going to lead the way and actually show us and actually say, I am willing to fight through this, and I'm not going to give up at the first, you know, attempt. I'm not going to give up at the first failure, though it might feel like everyone, I want to just give up. That would be my charge that I will have to give to everyone and say, it's great to read the books. It's great to do the podcast. It's awesome, you know, and I'm not against it. But I think what really is going to make the world change is once we start putting steps into this, and once we start fighting through it. And even after the first failure, don't give up. You're always going to have people criticizing, you know, and being offended. But that means that we go to the cross. It doesn't mean we quit. It means that we fight through it.
It's good. It's a good way to end it, Lizzie. To hear you talk about the church not as an institution that either passed or failed a certain test, I hear you talk about the church as a family that is loves each other, is sometimes dysfunctional, offends each other, says stupid things, does stupid things to each other, but just needs to keep going back to the cross and repenting for it, and acting like family instead of labeling each other as in or out or red or blue or woke or not woke or gets it, doesn't get it, racist, not racist, whatever. We're a family, and sometimes we do stupid things to each other and say stupid things, see things differently, and we need to keep repenting and going back to Jesus. That's how I hear you talk about the church, which is really beautiful.
Amen.
So, Tom, you got anything else for her?
No, I just want to thank you for taking the time to join us here. I think someone with a personal perspective on it like yours really, really helps bring this thing home. So I appreciate your input and you sharing your experience.
Oh, thank you for having me. That was such a pleasure.
Would you do the honors in closing us in prayer?
Sure. Jesus, I thank you that you came down on earth for a bride. And your bride isn't perfect. Your bride doesn't have it all together. Your bride makes mistakes over and over again. And God, you knew this a long time ago. But still you came. You came, Lord, because you saw something beautiful that only your spirit can birth within your bride, Lord, and you want the whole world to see it. And God, this is the church. And despite how many times we fell, Lord, we can't help but come back to you. We can't help but allow your spirit to revive us, Lord. And God, I thank you for the countless times that you forgive and you give us second chances. And we come, Lord, acknowledging that we don't have all answers, but God, we know that you do. And we also know that you're calling us deeper and you're calling us into this work. So God, I pray that your call would not just be intellectual. I pray that your call would not just be statistics and numbers, but God, we realize that you're calling us to win souls, it's always been about relationship. It's always been about going after the heart of those around us, Lord. So God, I thank you for Pastor Chris and his leadership and even his desire to address the issue. God, I pray that you will give him wisdom and wisdom in knowing where to step in and what his next step will look like. And if there is an action on his part, Lord, that you will give him wisdom in that arena. God, I pray that you will continue to stir his heart and just strengthen him. I know this is tough work. And sometimes we can easily separate the church from our own personal family. But God, this is your family. And so God,